Hello friends, it is wonderful to have you with me again today. Today we have another currency from around the world video. I've put together another little presentation for you. Please feel free to download it using the link, and you can follow along with me if you like. So I was researching a lot for the next currency video, and there were a lot of modern choices, understandably, but I wanted, like always, to do something a little different. And I happened upon this currency, which is incredibly unique, and that is the Raystones of Yap. And essentially they are these huge stone circles that are used as currency, but not in the everyday way that we use today. They are very ancient and have a very rich history behind them. So we're going to take a look at this ancient currency today. So let's just get familiar with what this currency is all about. A raystone or fey stone is one of many large artifacts that were manufactured and treasured by the native inhabitants of the Yap Islands in Micronesia. The typical raystone is carved out of crystalline limestone and is shaped as a disc with a hole in the center. The smallest may be 3.5 centimeters or 1.4 inches in diameter. The largest stone is 3.6 meters or 12 foot in diameter and 50 centimeters, 20 inches thick, and weighs 4,000 kilograms or 8,800 pounds. Raystones were quarried on several of the Micronesian islands, mainly Palau, but briefly on Guam as well. The practice stopped in the early 20th century, and today there are around 6,000 large raystones outstanding in the island, and several can also be seen in museums around the world. They, as you can see, are just left in the kind of wilderness, out in the open, where anybody can sort of go and see them. The stones were highly valued by the Yapese and used for important ceremonial gifts. The ownership of a large stone, which would be too difficult to move, was established by its history as recorded in oral tradition rather than by its location. Thus, a change of ownership was effected by appending the transfer to the oral history of the stone. I bet that gets quite confusing. Ray stones have been viewed by modern economists as a form of money and are often used as an example to support the thesis that the value of some form of money can be assigned purely through shared belief in said value. Although modern currency has replaced the stones as everyday currency, the Ray stones are still exchanged in traditional ways between the Yapese. They are a national symbol and are depicted on local license plates. Here is some native people. I'm guessing that this is their Ray stone. So just quickly, for everybody, including myself, who is unfamiliar with the Yap Islands and where they're situated. So I hadn't heard of Yap Island before researching this video. So we have Japan here, Asia, the Philippines and Indonesia, with Australia here, Papua New Guinea, and it's kind of off and in between all of these three. You have Hawaiian Islands over here too. So that's where the Yap Islands are. And Yap traditionally refers to an island group located in the Caroline Islands of the Western Pacific Ocean. The name Yap in recent years has come to also refer to the state within the Federated States of Micronesia, inclusive of the Yap main islands and its various outer islands. And Yap is actually made of 4 separate islands. Pap, Yap proper, so Marbak, which is somewhere here. Gagil Tamil, Map, and Rumung. The 4 islands are separated by relatively narrow water features, and the islands are surrounded by a common coral reef. So you have all the different islands here. Look at that. So we have a little bit of geography in our head. So let's continue. So what do the Ray stones look like? So the Ray stones are approximately round, although some more recent ones are rather elongated. In the best worked ones, the thickness decreases from the center to the rim, gradually or in 2 or 3 steps. The central hole is about 1/6 of the diameter of the stone, and sometimes there are additional holes off-center. The diameter varies from 3.5 centimeters, or 1.4 inches, to 6.3 meters, 12 foot, but most are between 30 centimeters, 12 inches, and 50 centimeters, 20 inches. The stones are made of light-colored crystalline rock consisting of calcium carbonate. Stones with brown or white streaks were particularly prized. Weathered stones are dull grey. The stone occurs in Palau as deposits slowly formed on the walls of some caves by percolating rainwater. Tectonic activity millions of years ago lifted limestone deposits out of the sea, and these were eroded by rainwater, forming a typical cave-riddled karst geology. So you can see here, this one has weathered a little bit. You have some moss growing here, there. Then you have the hole in the center. So, what is their use and what is their value? So, as we just touched upon before, the Ray stones were, and they still are, used in rare, important social transactions such as marriage, inheritance, political deals, sign of alliance, or rarely in exchange for food. Many of them are now placed in front of meeting houses, around village courts, or along pathways. Although the ownership of a particular stone might change, the stone itself is rarely moved due to its weight and risk of damage. Thus, the physical location of a stone was often not significant. Ownership was established by a shared agreement and could be transferred even without physical access to the stone. Each large stone had an oral history that included the names of previous owners. In one instance, a large ray being transported by canoe and outrigger was accidentally dropped and sunk to the sea floor. Though it was never seen again, everyone agreed that the ray must still be there, so it continued to be transacted as any other stone. You've got to have a good memory, right, to remember who owned what and the oral history going back years and years and years. The perceived value of a specific stone was based not only on its size and its craftsmanship and obviously how it looked, but also its history. The value could depend, for instance, on whether it was bought by a famous sailor or whether people died during its transport. That's very, very interesting. You see another cluster here. Really big one, smaller one, and even smaller ones. There. So let's look at its history. The story of the origin of the raystone survives only in Yapese oral legends. According to one version, about 500 to 600 years ago, Anang Umang, a Yapese from Tomo Island, was instructed by the divinity Li Gerem to go by boat with 7 companions to the mythical island of Magaraga, south of Palau, where they found a sparkling stone. According to some variants, the stones were first cut into various shapes, such as fish, lizards, turtles, or crescent moons, but eventually they settled for the shape of a full moon with a hole at the centre for transport. I imagine that was for ease. A different legend attributes the discovery to chance by a group of fishermen who were driven to Palau by a storm, who fashioned a fish from a local sparkling stone and took it to the King of Rule as a substitute for the fish that they failed to catch. It is unknown how long the raystones have been in use in Yap. Flat rocks have been found there that are up to 2,000 years old, but the oldest do not resemble today's raystones, and it is not known how they were used. This is a picture of a boy standing in the center of one. It absolutely dwarfs him. So, how were these stones manufactured, and how did they get them to where they needed to go? So, expeditions to Palau for materials would last up to several years and could result in the death of the members of the expedition in the quarries or during the sea voyage, the transport portion. On return, the stones could be carried by canoe, or for the larger specimens that couldn't go on the canoe because they were too heavy and they would sink it, they would be transported on bamboo rafts. But since the raft was really slow and they couldn't really steer it, it was usually let loose in advance to be carried towards Yap by sea currents. It's very, very hope and a prayer sort of stuff. While the men left sometime later in canoes on its pursuit. This return route could be more than 1,000 kilometers long. The expedition would eventually recover the raft in the vicinity of Yap and tow it to the islands. Stones were often lost at sea. No wonder. If you get a really bad storm, it's gonna tip over, right? So this is a raft. You see a couple of stones being transported there. And here are the ones on the bottom of the ocean, which still belong to people and are transferred to people. It doesn't matter that they are inaccessible and in the bottom of the ocean. So, in the quarries, the stones were cut out from wall deposits of calcite as rough upright discs. It seems that they were then propped up for shaping and finishing and polishing. The rough work appears to have been done with pickaxes or adzes with blades 1 to 3 centimeters wide. This is that. Or the blades were made of stone or the shell of large clams such as tridacna. According to oral traditions, the central hole was made with a coral reef stone used as a fire drill, presumably a large bow drill. So really sort of very primitive but effective tools which utilize the marine life and the materials around them. It is reported that the stones were transported on land by inserting a long log or long bamboo through the hole, which was carried on the shoulders of several men, which you can see here. Carried this way, the largest stones would have needed hundreds of men to transport, suggesting that the more likely possibility is that the largest stones were rolled akin to wheels on an axle. So instead of carrying them on their shoulders, they would just wheel them along like a car, I suppose. So when contact was made with Europeans in the 19th century, it provided the Yapese at Palau with iron tools, which made the cutting and the shaping of the stones much easier. Not that much later, the Yapese made deals with Europeans to use their ships to transport the stones back to Yap. These arrangements enabled the manufacture of much larger and heavier ray stones, up to 4 meters in diameter, as well as a larger number of them. However, these modern stones were much less valuable than the more ancient ones. The trade for ray stones eventually stopped at the beginning of the 20th century due to trade disputes between Spanish and German interests in the area, and the quarries were abandoned. When Imperial Japanese forces took over Yap during World War II, they used some of the stones for construction or as anchors, which I think is a little bit disrespectful. Here is another shot of one of these huge stones being transported by a log by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people. So, what happened to the ray stones? Are they still used today? Today, ray stones have been replaced by the US dollar for day-to-day transactions, like, of course, grocery shopping. You can't keep one of these in your purse, right? But for more conceptual exchanges like rights or customs, stones remain a vital currency for Yap's 11,000 residents. Here you see a couple of examples. in museums. So, thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this to be informative as well as relaxing. I think the concept of these stones is really, really unique, and it kind of reminds me of like Bitcoin. I'm not like a cryptocurrency nerd or anything like that, but it kind of reminds me of currency that doesn't exist necessarily physically or accessible to, you can't use it necessarily to buy stuff. But it's a really interesting look of how we put value on things. And, money is just a man-made concept, right? It doesn't really exist. I'm getting a little bit too deep now, but I thought this was a really interesting look of placing value on something so inaccessible. And even if it's destroyed or you can't even see it, it still has value. It's really, really interesting. So that's the ray stones of Yap. Again, I'll put a link down in the description where you can download this little presentation-y thing. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video. Take care. Bye bye.